Let's play pretend for a second. Ready? Close your eyes, get into the mood, and open them. Imagine it's the next PlayStation Direct. The show's about to end, but not before you see this on your screen. Or this. Or maybe even Sorry, that was terrible. You see, Bluepoint Games isn't working on the next remaster or remake in their long catalog of great remakes. They launched the PS5 with Demon's Souls to pretty much universal acclaim. They could have been working on one of these projects, but do you know what they've been working on? They had been working on a God of War live service game. Who the hell asked for that after the massive success of the PS4? In my opinion, PlayStation can't keep doing this, or their business will start to tank at some point. They'll definitely be okay, but they need to change their ways and fast, because they need to start garnering some goodwill with their fan base. In my last video, I covered Xbox's decision to move Forza Horizon 5 over to the PlayStation 5, and this signified the end of Xbox exclusivity as we know it. Today, I want to discuss what that means for Sony and the larger picture of Sony's console business this generation. To put it into my own words, it's been a massive disappointment. And I don't mean in terms of console sales and game sales, I mean in terms of business decisions, innovation, and the continuity of the PlayStation 4. We all know how good the PlayStation 4 was. It was the first console I had bought with my own money. I was in 7th grade at the time, and if I look at consoles in general, I think the PlayStation 4 has as good of a catalog as any console ever released. So it was pretty clear that I was going to stick with Sony. I was going to buy their next console. You get to 2020, I was so excited to grab my PS5. I grabbed it at a Best Buy on the way home for Thanksgiving break from college. And right off the rip, we had some great games. We had Demon's Souls, we had Miles Morales, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart came out a few years later, and about a year after that, we even got Horizon Forbidden West and eventually God of War Ragnarok. I know I've missed some games in between there, but those are just some of my favorites. And when you look at those games, you could say, well, the PlayStation 5's been great. But what heavy hitters have they really had since? We've gotten a lot of remasters and remakes this generation. Ghost of Tsushima, The Last of Us 1 again, and Part 2, I believe. Horizon Zero Dawn got a remaster. Obviously, Spider-Man was packaged in as well. So, flash forward right to this second, and I am not particularly thrilled with my time with my PS5 the first 4 or 5 years now. I've had a lot of fun and I've played some great games, but I can't help but feel disappointed at this. You could make the argument that PlayStation's big, heavy-hitting studios are hard at work on new single-player, first-party titles, and you'd definitely be correct. Naughty Dog is working on an entire new IP, Sucker Punch is making Ghost of Yotei, Insomniac is working on Wolverine and the heavily rumored Venom spin-off, and Sony Santa Monica is hopefully cooking up the next chapter in the God of War universe. However, it's damaging to hear that Sony has invested so much of its assets into live service games. A few years ago, Sony began the initiative to have many of its first-party developers crank out live service games. I think there was a greenlit 12 live service games, and a good majority of those have been canceled right now. Instead of innovating and pushing the genre forward with revolutionary single-player experiences like they did with the PS4, Sony completely abandoned its bread and butter to chase cash. It's important to note the increasing cost of AAA game development in 2025, but there's ways around this that aren't just green-lighting this many live service games, not putting real heart and soul into it, and hoping that they become the next Fortnite to make a ton of money. You see, there's a human element to this. You go and look at Bend Studio, the creators of Days Gone, a game that was loved by a lot of gamers, although not all critics loved it. They had been working on a live service game that was just recently canned. You think about how there's a ton of talented developers at that team who probably wanted a chance to follow up on Days Gone, which did perform pretty well and had its audience. You could even jump over to a studio like Bluepoint. I talked about it in the intro. They love remaking games, and they did such a good job making Demon's Souls. How does Sony not think, yeah, they should go make Bloodborne again? Make a second Bloodborne if From Software doesn't want to do it. It's easy money, and Bluepoint has a clear track record. So why were they making a live service God of War game? I just don't get it. It's incredibly confusing. The point is, now many of PlayStation's first-party studios are back to square one again. Instead of releasing single-player games it could have released in the past year or two, they're back to the drawing board, and it's very disappointing because, as gamers, I don't want to say we're suffering because there's more to play now than ever, but that Sony single-player release cadence has been completely interrupted by the chase for a ton of cash. There's not a lot of games to play exclusively on the PlayStation 5 right now. Single-player games that were the focal point of Sony's last generation that helped it destroy the Xbox brand as we know it are now too few and far between to make this generation a success in terms of quality of games. Sony will surely get back there. We'll get back to this game-making ideology, especially as I pointed to previously with some of their flagship studios releasing games soon. But many of these teams are starting from the beginning again, so it's not unlikely that we won't see these games until the PlayStation 6. So what can Sony do in the meantime? Well, for starters, they can take a look at their good friends over at Microsoft, who ironically have picked up PlayStation's business model, pushing out high-quality, single-player focused adventures. A few years ago, Microsoft sold us on their acquisition of dozens and dozens of studios to develop first-party titles under the Microsoft and Xbox umbrella. We're seeing the fruits of their labor now. This recent developer direct, we had South of Midnight, Doom the Dark Ages, Clair Obscura's Expedition 33, and Ninja Gaiden 4, along with the shadow drop of Ninja Gaiden 2 Black. That's not even mentioning upcoming titles such as Avowed, The Outer Worlds 2, State of Decay 3, Blade, Gears of War E-Day, Fable, and the heavily rumored Oblivion and Fallout 3 remakes. It's clear that Xbox has gone all in on this push for single-player games with the understanding that these are the games that keep your audiences coming back. And it makes audiences buy your hardware and buy into your ecosystem. An important note must be taken, though. Xbox has also shown us that the resurrection of long-forgotten IPs is an incredible way to rejuvenate consumers' beliefs in the platform. If you go take a look at the recently mentioned Ninja Gaiden 2 Black and see the reception of it, shadow dropping and bringing back that IP with Ninja Gaiden 4, Sony could look at this and say, why aren't we doing this? This is incredibly easy. It makes my previous point about a studio like Bluepoint Games making the God of War live service game all that more depressing. They could have been working on another Sly Cooper or bringing them back to modern hardware. They could have been working on Jack. They could have been working on Infamous, but they weren't. Xbox has really set this precedent that they're willing to do this, as we've seen with Ninja Gaiden, and I think PlayStation can totally do it. I don't mean for this to be some sort of propaganda for single-player games, although that's my preferred way of gaming nowadays. I've gotten older, and I don't have as much time to grind multiplayer games, but there's definitely a spot for multiplayer and live service games in this medium. There's good ideas from Sony making live service games. I think a Horizon Monster Hunter type game could be absolutely incredible. And Sony even needs a first-person shooter on their platforms. Multiplayer games are great, and they can make money. But the fact that they completely abandon their bread and butter of first-party, story-driven titles is just completely baffling to me, and it's really disappointing. The PlayStation 5 has been a massive disappointment to me, and it's because of Sony's business decisions. If they look at Xbox and they decide that they could revive some of these franchises, I think Sony could definitely get on the right track again. You look at franchises even like Resistance or Little Big Planet. These are iconic franchises for a lot of PlayStation fans, and you can rework them from the ground up. Just look at what they did with God of War. Obviously, there were no plans to completely, get rid of the God of War franchise, but Sony Santa Monica completely changed it. You can do that with the Resistance. You can make it this big AAA first-person shooter type experience. You can even try something with the Order 1886. I actually really like that game. The bottom line is, Sony needs to get back to their bread and butter. Otherwise, I think people are going to start to poke around a little more. You look at what Xbox is doing. I know they're bringing their games onto other platforms, but why wouldn't you get an Xbox right now? If you pay for Game Pass, you get so many good games for free as long as you pay for that subscription. I think it's time for Sony to stop resting on their laurels and saying, everyone's buying our box, so we're not going to innovate. They need to keep going, and ultimately, I think they will. But it's been a disappointment so far, and that's for sure. Anyway, guys, that's going to do it for this video. I appreciate you sticking around for this. I know it's been a pretty long one, but I had a lot of thoughts, as you could tell. If you guys are into this type of content, where I cover the latest in the gaming industry, or I talk about games in any sort of fashion, I'd love for you guys to subscribe, leave a like, comment, or even give me some constructive criticism. I'm just starting off at this, so I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'm having a ton of fun doing it. Anyway, I hope you all enjoy your night.